Hi again. I wanted to share a project with you that I'm doing for my booth. This is a little rooster decoupage project on a board and quick and easy project, but wanted to also show you some techniques using this new rice paper. This is Decoupage Queen rice paper, and I actually designed it, so I'm pretty proud of it. I have these designs and a couple of others available on my website right now, thdecoratl.com, and also decoupagequeen.com. So we'll be adding more in the coming months. But one common question that I get when people use rice paper is if it's creased or torn or crumpled, whether or not they can still use it. And so I just wanted to show you what that looks like. Um, and it's your results may vary, but I wanted to experiment a little bit and show you I don't have any problems using um, paper that's a little bit imperfect. Um, in fact, I generally do the tearing of rice paper as a technique in a lot of my projects on purpose, because I find that the edges, when you tear them, they'll blend nicely into a background. So I'm just using an 8x8 board. It's already white. It's primed with gesso already, so I don't need to do anything literally to it other than glue my paper onto it. So I'm just going to, the size of this paper does not fit exactly onto the board. It would have some white gap around the sides. And so what I'm doing is I'm going around and I'm tearing it evenly, um, to try to minimize some of that gap. In fact, I might do this even if it did fit perfectly, just to add some interest to the edges, so it's not just a piece of paper glued onto a board. I try to put a little bit of thought into some of these projects. Sometimes, not all the time. um, and when you have a booth, um, they say the smalls pay the rent, right? So um, sometimes looking for fun, easy, small projects that you can do, and the customers usually love these little small projects. So um, anyway, my stepdaughter and I have a booth in Marietta, and so this will be headed there here pretty soon. And we started out doing decoupage using napkins on bottles, and our whole booth was filled with that. And I don't think anybody really knew what to do with the bottles. They were really pretty, but they didn't sell very well. So we moved on to other things, and now our booth is full of all kinds of things. So that's where my interest in decoupage started and how it started. I don't use napkins that much anymore. I use them sometimes on the insides of journals, and occasionally if I'm teaching a class, like I do still teach the bottle classes because I love it so much personally, and people like it as a class, but they don't know what to do with the bottles when they buy them. So anyway, that's the image, and it's all torn around there. Trying to work on my camera angles a little bit. I did get a new overhead mount so that you don't have to look at it sideways, but I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm gonna experiment, but this was a quick one that I wanted to address. Actually, a couple of my customers had asked me to do it, so so that's why I'm sharing the technique with you. Um, and I think in one of my videos I said I don't worry about wrinkles too much. Well, here I'm going to show you how to minimize the wrinkles. So I use Collage Pauge. It's a matte finish. It's product by Aleene's. She's the same one that makes the tacky glue. There are so many different things you can use. There's no right or wrong product, but this just so happens to be the one that I excuse me, started with and had really good results with. So I've never switched. So rice paper is also a lot easier to work with than napkins because it's a little bit thicker. So what you do is you just take a thin coat of your product, your Mod Podge, sorry, not Mod Podge, your Mod Podge or Collage, Pauge, or varnishing, or any other kind of gesso or medium that you might want to use. They will all work. Again, there's no right or wrong product, but this just so happens to be the one that I like. And I haven't experimented with others, so I can't answer the questions about how those would look. I know some people really like other things and swear by them, and that's great. So again, just a thin layer. All you want to make sure the whole surface that you're working with within that section is covered. If it doesn't get covered, what will happen is you'll get some wrinkles or some bubbles underneath, some little air bubbles, which you don't want. So super important to make sure the first layer is completely covered. And then I'll actually go back in as I'm working over the top to just seal it down nice and tight. And that gives me an opportunity to kind of determine whether or not I missed something on the bottom. So if I feel like I did, I can lift it back up and work on it some more. So section at a time, and you just work this way, and that's how you can eliminate the wrinkles. This same technique will work with tissue paper. It will work with napkins just fine. So, it'll also work with thicker papers. Now, thicker papers, I want to just say, if you have something that's not designed necessarily for decoupage, like a poster, you can definitely still use it. But I would recommend just misting it lightly with some water. And that'll just soften the fibers a little bit so that it'll lay down flatter. And it will help the product to kind of soak through so that it will really meld with your surface. Excuse me. And I've got some really cool Italian posters that I got from Calembor, actually. Excuse me, and Graffiche Tessuti. So I'm actually going to do a video using one of those posters here pretty soon. Okay, so that is completely covered now, and I'm going to move on to the next step. So you see some of that white showing through. What I'm going to do is just take another coordinating looking paper, and I'm going to use the edges of this paper as kind of a border. So I really like the stained edge around this paper. This is another one of the Decoupage Queen designs. It's got a pretty little goddess on it, which I will save for another project. I always save my scraps. You should always save your scraps. You never know when they'll come in handy. Sometimes it's just fun to do a collage or a piece with just the scraps that you have and see what you come up with. And if it's just trash, then it's no big deal, but you can work on techniques that way and experiment with new products that you might be getting, stamps and all kinds of other things. So anyway, save your scraps. Junk journals, they come in handy for those. So anyway, so I am trimming the edge of this paper nice and neatly because that is going to be on the straight edge of the board. And then I'm going to rip around some of that staining to get my little border here. And again, this does not have to be perfect. One thing I really like about decoupage is that it pairs so nicely with vintage looking papers and vintage, vintage ideas that aren't perfect. I mean, you have stains and wrinkles and, you know, marks, random marks in places, and the vintage pieces are torn, used, and dented and scratched. And so anyway, I just think that you don't have to be perfect with a project like this. So now if you're doing a piece of furniture that you're selling or something like that, then yeah, I mean, you're gonna definitely want a very clean sheet, as clean as possible to work with, and kind of minimize what you start off with, any potential problems. But for something like this, the little leftovers and random bits are great. Okay, so we're gonna just glue that down all the way around. And so what I'm doing here, because my top coat is still pretty wet, I don't necessarily need to add more product on the bottom of this as I go, because it's still pretty wet. And so like I was saying, I was just showing you, in a collage piece, you could totally just add other bits and pieces as well. Like I could easily take that pumpkin and layer him on there, but I'm not going to. All right. So we're just working around the edge in little torn strips, and I'm not even really trying to line up the size of those torn edges. I'm just kind of going with it as I go. So another thing I wanted to mention is if I had some sort of tear on the, like, let's say on one of those leaves or something, I could definitely take some acrylic paint and just paint over it. So you can easily paint over these. You can also use like a finishing wax to camouflage any mistakes, or to just add more pop, sparkle, and interest. So I love the Finnabair waxes. They're my favorite. Vintage gold is my favorite. And sometimes I really try not to use it on every project that I do, but I always use it. I feel like I have to use it. Like I'm like, oh, what is this missing? Oh, I know. It's missing my Finnabair wax. And for some reason, I always reach for that vintage gold. It's just the perfect color. Even when I try to just use regular gold, I end up going back over it with the vintage gold because I just like it so much. So anyway, I'm going to do that on this one too. All right, so this is very slow process, but you can see what I'm doing. Again, not even cutting it, and not trying to be super careful about where I end up there. All right, so I'm gonna speed this up a little bit. Okay, that's better. Get through it a little bit quicker that way, but the technique's not changing, so you get the idea here. Okay. So last little piece there. And so what I will do with this, now that I'm gone all the way around, is I will actually take the edges, they're white, and I'll paint those black. And then I'll add some finishing wax to it. I'll take a little heat gun to it. So you can see the finished result here in just a minute. And I'll give you some close-up shots too of when it's dry, how that crease came out. And again, I'm just going to save these little bits for another project. You never know when you might need a pumpkin or some apples or a goddess and something else. Okay, so we are back. This piece has completely dried, and you can very slightly see, the crease, but it does not impact the overall look of the project. If it made you, if you didn't like that, or it was bothering you, you could always go and add a little bit of touch-up paint or something to it to blend it in. The hardest part about that, though, can be getting the right colors. If you're going to do that, I would recommend using a really good quality acrylic paint, like some Winsor & Newton. And don't try to use your craft paint for a project like that, because you're not going to be able to get a really good color match. Okay, so you can see how it came out, and just a nice, pretty distressed border around there. And I wanted to leave it like this, but I can't resist. I had to add, I'm gonna have to add my wax. So here I was saying, so if you if that piece got torn somehow, you could totally just rip off another little section of a similar color piece and dab it on there, and it would not be noticeable. So I do that sometimes, just a little quick fix, correct, and repair. And there's a close-up again of the finished little chicken and the black edges. Okay, so I'll put a little, I'll probably put a little hook on the back of that. And there's my Finnabair vintage gold wax that I love so much. I try to use other colors, and I always end up going back to this one. So thank you, Anna, for making this wax. Okay, and I use this in just about every project I do, the little journals that I make, or mixed media projects. I use it on everything, furniture. So I don't use it on hardware, though. I will say I don't think it works very well on hardware. The best thing that I found that works on hardware is called Rub and Buff, and it completely covers hardware. So I'm just going to finish, I'm just going around and I'm using my finger, and I'm just finishing these edges here in that gold wax to give it a little bit of shimmer and distressing. And I just kind of blend it in sometimes. So sometimes I'll just add it, in various little spots on the piece itself, just to give it a little bit of dimension. So yes, the chicken has some little gold highlights, and so does the sunflower. And there you go. There's our little 10-minute chicken. So thanks for watching, and come back soon. Bye-bye.